Tick tack, it's my clock telling me I should get up. I should get up.
Hi, and welcome to The Conscious Loop, where woo-woo and the real world collide. I'm your host, Katrina DeAngelis. Join me as we explore what it looks like to live consciously almost always. Each episode, we dive into transforming mindsets and shifting paradigms through topics such as developing self-awareness, living authentically, communication, strengthening relationships, and leading from the inside out. If you're ready to break out of your unconscious loops and discover what else is possible, you came to the right place. You ready? Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome back to The Conscious Loop. I am so excited to welcome to the show today Sam Garcia. She's the author of the best-selling book, Regenerative Business, How to Align Your Business with Nature for More Abundance, Fulfillment, and Impact. She's also the founder of Dirty Alchemy, a marketing agency and consulting firm for conscious entrepreneurs, coaches, and course creators. I have personally read her book, and it has been a game changer in my own life. And so I'm really excited to dive into some of the tips, tools, and concepts that she speaks about in the book here today on the show. I think it's really unique and different probably from a lot of things you've heard about. Regenerative business and leadership and leading a more regenerative life is very important to me. And so this episode's very dear to my heart. All right. I'm so excited to introduce you to Sam. Let's dive in. Sam, I'm so excited to have you here on The Conscious Loop. Your work has not only inspired me, but it's so important in the world. And I'm just thrilled to have you come share your message with the audience and have an exciting conversation.
I'm so excited to be here. The conversation was already flowing before you hit record, and you're like, oh, maybe I should be recording this.
I know. Note to self, always just record from the beginning. So before we dive in, I would love for you to share with the audience, before we throw around these terms, regenerative or regenerative business, what does that really mean? And what does that look like in this world, in society? And in contrast to the more traditional way of looking at business.
Mm-hmm. Regenerative business is based off of the premise of how would nature design a system? I came from the background of regenerative agriculture. I got into permaculture over a decade ago, and my husband's a full-time regenerative farmer. They're usually based off of forest systems. They look completely different than the agriculture, even organic agriculture that you see throughout North America and worldwide, where there are just fields of monocrops and lettuce as far as the eye can see. It was based off of the factory model in which the Industrial Revolution happened. I mean, there's actually been 4 different industrial revolutions to date, but many, many years ago, the first one happened. Then we started making choices in systems and in business around more productivity, more efficiency, which makes sense. You think of an assembly line that makes a car, it is more efficient if you build it in that way. But it suddenly became to ripple out into our entire culture where humans became less and less important, and efficiency and productivity and profits became the most important thing. And of course, as a business owner myself, we want to be making money. We want to be making profits, but that trumping human health, that trumping relationships, that trumping the future of our entire planet is just bad. Just bad business.
What got us here won't get us there.
Yeah. Well, and being efficient and productive, like those aren't inherently bad things. It's just when it becomes more important than human life and the life of our planet, it's just like, why?
Well, and that's a great question though. Why? Like, I know you were going to say more on that, but I think that there's so much resistance to sort of changing the way that things have been done, but it feels like it's really obvious as to why things do need to change and what the world could look like if done differently. What's coming up is resistance to change, but that almost doesn't feel like that's not deep enough.
No, there's layers on layers for this, right? The standard corporate structure is patriarchal. There's someone on top where the patriarchy isn't anti-man. Isn't like man over woman. It is actually father. That's patriarchy is about the father figure, the man on top, that top 1%. And corporate structure is based on the people who own the company at the very, very top, making all the profits. And the people going down, there might be higher ups that are doing okay, but down at the bottom, it's completely exploitative labor. it's also a really great demonstration of how women are not respected in our culture. Of course, like women as Earth, women as a representation of Mother Earth. When we don't respect women and we don't respect the invisible labor that we give and the unique energy that we bring to society, that we bring to relationships, of course we're going to disrespect the earth.
Such a good point. It's like how we even view different types of work. And I think you talked about this in your book too, consumer and prosumer, I want to say, where we place way more value on certain types of producing and consuming. That is, now I'm realizing, more alignment with patriarchal structures or sort of like the traditional corporate industrialized structure as we see it.
And like the last little piece with this is there's just a lot of unhealed humans. There's this drive for security, and most people's idea of security is coming through money. Again, we're pro money, we're pro wealth, but if billionaires are just trying to make more and more and more money and get off the earth and get to Mars and save themselves and not actually think about philanthropic efforts and collective change, there's something wrong there. There's something in the actual humans that is unhealed, that needs to be worked through, worked on. Maybe it's a root chakra thing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. No, that's such a good point. That was one of the things I loved so much about your book, because it took the work that I was, maybe for the past 10 years doing on more like corporate structures and like environments and dynamics, and really put it into a perspective of a human, like one individual, like me as a human, as an individual. I'm going to be the representation of any business or anything that I set up when I'm doing it for myself, not when I'm going in for another company, because that's change. But it was such a mindset shift, because it created this gap between, I feel like I've been on a healing journey for years, and I think a lot of people that I've interviewed have, and it's so interesting to see how that has shown up in how they do business and how that is so different from the traditional structure that we see. And I think that's like, even just for people who don't know regeneration, that's such a beautiful way to look at it in relationship to the healing that you've done and nature, which is so funny. I feel like nature is so regenerative, but yeah, again, your book just did such a beautiful job at really articulating and drawing those parallels between the two.
Yeah, and going back to the original question is, what is regenerative business? Is we're really, as with when we build nature-based systems, they are loops that feed each other. They're collaborative. There is not just one product at the end of an assembly line, but there is healthier humans, healthy environment, better yields, more nutritious food. Like in terms of our business, it looks like you as the owner feeling so fulfilled and like you're actually living your soul's purpose. And the people that you're working with in your business their lives are better, which impacts their communities, which impacts the global scheme. When we're actually thinking about our team is actually thriving within their individual roles on your team and making good money, and that wealth is going into their own families. And so there's this ripple effect and different layers of impact that happens, instead of just being like, I just care about getting to 6 figures, or I just care about building $1 million business, and that being the one goal. And it can be a beautiful goal, but not if it cancels out all the other elements of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about how it's adding value versus like extracting, what are some of the paradigm shifts or mindset shifts that go into running, or even like being a leader on a team that is, you're trying to make a shift from maybe a little bit more traditional to like now more regenerative? What are some mindset shifts that typically have to happen, or that humans in a way resist? Like, assuming I had no idea what regenerative was and what that looked like, what mindset challenges would I come up against?
So the shift that I love people to make as leaders, as business owners, is to, I don't know if you can hear my husband's cell phone ringing in the background. Oh, it just ended. Okay, good.
At least it's a nice ringtone.
So the first shift that I really think is important for people to make is, usually there's a very me at the center perspective, in life, which is natural. But when you're a business owner, and you can do this as a leader on a team as well, of externalizing and connecting in with the soul of the business and recognizing that it's a separate entity than you. Because when we go in it as I am my business, or it's all about me, or I am the leader, I have to hold and control this, it doesn't allow for the amount of growth that's possible when you actually separate yourself out from the system. And the imagery that I really like with this is, can you imagine your business or the sector of the company that you're in? Can you imagine it as this forest where you're at this, like maybe you planted the first seed. As a business owner, you're planting the first seed. And this beautiful forest is growing and it creates this amazing space. And maybe you have actually walked through a forest where you entered the trail. And by the end of the trail, you feel like a different person. You're like, wow, I'm just completely transformed. Especially if you're a service provider in some way, you're like, it's my responsibility to change your life. It is my responsibility to deliver this service. When actually, them coming into contact with your business ecosystem is like walking through that forest that transforms you in and of itself. It takes so much stress off your back and actually allows for like unseen. I don't know how woo we're getting on this podcast, but it actually allows for unseen forces. Yeah, the unseen forces to come in and support. And you can almost visualize like you're standing in the middle of this beautiful ecosystem that is your business, and people are walking through, and maybe they're coming up and thanking you for that first seed you planted and the work that you do tending to this forest, but they're not actually here for you. They're here to be transformed. They're here to be impacted. And like, if you're a leader of a team, same sort of thing. You don't have to be the one micromanaging them. Can you actually allow them to thrive within this ecosystem?
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. I was like picturing myself as you were talking, walking through the forest. And I had a really big shift recently in building this business. I'm launching a business actually in 3 weeks, which is wild because I've been working on it for 2 years. And a part of something that I had to go through to get to a place of launching is releasing my attachment to it and releasing that identity piece and allowing it to take on a soul of its own, which I know you have a resource on connecting with the soul or spirit of your business, which plug, everyone should go listen to that. I loved it.
Great meditation.
Because it allowed me to like, to take myself out of like, wow, I feel like this is my whole soul that I'm pouring into it, because it's so much of everything that I've built and what I believe in. And I was stuck and I was so attached to it. And so shifting, and even as a leader on a team or an individual, to take yourself out of that and, you know, this isn't about me, but this is about the impact that it's going to have, was such a huge mindset shift for me.
Yeah. I love hearing that.
Yeah. Okay. So more on the mindsets and paradigm shifts. What happens when you sort of revolt against what's not working? Because I think we see a lot of that. And I mean, it's not just recently, it's been over the years. There's always this sort of movement of not being okay with something, revolting against it, and then you sort of go to the opposite of that. So we've seen that with a lot of movements, resistance against patriarchy or corporate structures or colonialism, capitalism, all of these things. And typically the solution, the first step, I feel like anyways, is to sort of revolt against that. And in this space of regenerative business and acknowledging that like it's still a business, like capitalism still plays a role. What do you have to say about anti-capitalism, and what do you have to say about a regenerative business's role in the entire ecosystem?
Yeah.
And how that can be a solution.
So the first time I heard someone talk about this concept was reading Women Who Run with the Wolves back in college. And she talks about it. I've tried to find the quote since then, but I was like, oh, I'm not going to reread this book. But she talks about how women, usually when women have this like big sexual awakening and are unrestricted in that regard, there's this pendulum swing to being hyper promiscuous. And like, I'm not slut shaming by any means, but it's like actually beyond the balance of what's true to them. It's just in revolt of the suppression they were in. They're being hyper promiscuous. And then usually it eventually comes to a center point. With anti-capitalism, I don't actually think it's a revolt. I don't think it's like this pendulum swing thing. There is a certain aspect of, if we're looking over the entire course of human existence, like money isn't a natural thing. It's a created concept by humans. Like, it's not a part of nature. It's a form of exchange, and it's a form of exchange that started to track debt. There's the imprint of debt on money, period. Like, there's great books on this. I can't remember the name of the book that goes really deep into the history of this.
Like, how that whole system works. Just like even moving to America, like I just got my green card and got my first credit card. Like I'm from Canada, so obviously not too different, but just the fact that my credit score was low because I'm new. I was like, seriously, I'm starting off like negative because I'm new to the country. Like, it just seemed so strange.
How weird here. But I'll tell a story to start this off, which is when I was 19, I went to the Big Island for the first time. I live on Maui now, and I'm originally from Michigan. But I did a summer on an organic farm on the Big Island of Hawaii. And it was so interesting to me because I was already in the environmentalism movement. I was already very diehard, fire in my veins on the topic of Earth in general. And so I wanted to try it out and actually work on a farm. And I went there and it was so trippy, the amount of people who moved to the Big Island of Hawaii and Hawaii in general, but I think the Big Island in particular, that are trying to escape society. They're like, I expect societal collapse. I think that all signs point to that, and with very legitimate reason to think that. Like, let's look at climate change and the election coming up. But a lot of
many factors.
Many factors. And people moving to the Big Island to like, I just want my slice of paradise over here while society collapses, because there's no hope for those guys. So I'm just going to be over here off grid on an island. And it was really disturbing to witness, because there was a part of me that was kind of drawn to that idea, but seeing other people living it, I was like, oh, there's something wrong here. There's something that feels wrong. And coming back, and many years later, it was really around this hopelessness and the sadness that comes with not wanting to fight for us, not wanting to be a part of collective change. There is nothing that feels better than feeling like you're a part of the solution. And so I swear I'm going to get back to anti-capitalism, but there's something with anti-capitalism where there's the reality that we live in a capitalist society, and probably in our lifetime, that's not going to change. Sure, there's barter systems and there's people trying to make conscious communities, but like, I've also lived in conscious communities, and there's like so much messed up, shadowy shit that happens in conscious communities that I'm like, oh, this is also not good. Don't want to be here.
I had a rude awakening to that as well.
Like, there's actually more shadow here. And like, of course, we can be looking for external forms of trade within our lives, but we also live in a capitalist society. So why wouldn't you master money? Why wouldn't you use money to its highest ability? Why wouldn't you transmute this feeling of debt that is imprinted on money, as that's what it came into existence for, into a source of activism?
Yeah, that's a huge mindset shift and paradigm shift. And I think it's one that's so important. And I still struggle with it. Like, even with the business that we're launching, like when it comes to pricing, there's such a struggle between like wanting it to be accessible, but then the reality of needing to operate a business to do the things and, like you said, be a part of the solution that we want to be a part of. Whereas maybe like a younger version of me would be like, let's have the smallest margin possible and get it out to like as many people. Like, that literally just isn't sustainable, because like you said, we are operating in a world that we might not ever see capitalism go away in our lifetime. But why not be a part of the solution, part of something that is using it in a more regenerative way and that's supportive of the vision in the world that you do want to work towards, which is oftentimes, I think, like what people who are, like you said, like running away sort of to this community or island or like wherever it is, it's in service, I think, of getting away from what they don't want. And I think the beautiful thing about regenerative businesses and working towards a regenerative economy is it feels like an actual tangible solution to the thing that people are running away from.
And there's a book called Financial Sorcery. Anyone into occult magic who's listening, there's a great book called Financial Sorcery, which is really fun. But in the intro of the book, I remember I read this in my early 20s, so I was not making good money in my business at all. And he talks about essentially, if you actually want to be anti-capitalist, you have to not use money. And the only way to actually do that in our society is join a monastery or go completely off grid. And going off grid without using money is very uncomfortable. Going off grid using money where you can like buy this Tesla solar system and like buy all of the everything that goes with it to live a comfortable life, like very comfortable off grid living. I can attest to that. But if you're going without being able to finance it, it is like you're essentially out in the woods, like pooping in a bucket and living on a stream for your running water. Most people who are spouting anti-capitalism on the internet are not doing that, and they'll never do that. So it's actually not a useful conversation. It's just shaming our society without a solution.
Yes. You know, I'm sure you're familiar. Are you familiar with like David Hawkins' work, like Levels of Consciousness? So I feel like what you just said is so important because it's like both of those things are still coming from lower levels of consciousness. Like it's still coming from fear, shame, guilt. Versus, okay, how do I raise my awareness, like raise the levels of consciousness and operate from that place versus still coming from shame. And I think it's so ingrained. Like we see it, you know, in marketing, we see it in the messages that we get it growing up as kids and becoming young adults. Like it's so ingrained. And that's, I think, also the role of a regenerative business. And I know you're in marketing too, so I would love to hear your perspective on that. Like, how can you market more regeneratively? And I think marketing is like even how we speak to people about things, right? Like when we speak about problems or when we speak about the world that we want to create or running a regenerative business, how does marketing play a role and how can marketing actually be more regenerative versus just like extractive? Like I'm thinking of the beauty industry, like is a good example. Like let me create a problem to give you a product in a bottle that's going to solve that problem that I just created for you. And then until I have a new problem to sell you a new bottle.
I would love to talk about this. Can we put a note to circle back to, I wanted to talk about pricing accessibility because you brought it up before and I have things to say.
You can go with that first, whatever feels good for you.
So when you're building a regenerative system, and I always like using the agriculture analogy because it's usually useful to see it, feel it, like imagine it in a 3D capacity versus business, which can sometimes feel ethereal. But when you're building a regenerative system, it can take 1 to 2 years just to plant the seeds, like putting out all the seedlings, laying the water lines. And then when the seedlings are actually coming up, they need to be protected from the wind and protected from too much rain and not enough rain. And there's a lot of human intervention and putting your energy into it for the first 1 to 2 years. But there comes a turning point where suddenly it's grown up enough. The root system, the actual root system of the plants have grown down and are now able to access the nutrients, access the water. And because of the shade of the trees, suddenly we have a different climate. There's more water both in the soil and coming down because trees change the climate of where it's at. And with a business, there is a point where in the beginning, a lot of people want to be as accessible as possible with their pricing, which is possible if you are willing to put the energetic time, money, human resources in place to grow a massive audience immediately. Because quote unquote accessible prices requires volume to be able to make the system run and continue. But for most businesses, or especially small businesses, that's just not realistic. And so to serve less people at higher prices, allow for you to slowly grow up the visibility that you need, like build that root system so that in 1 to 2 years, you can actually expand out your product suite. While these larger, more expensive, quote unquote, premium offers are still feeding the system while it's in this implementation installation phase. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I also feel just so good hearing it too, because it is a difficult decision for people who are more conscious about that and wanting to make things more accessible to, it can feel like a disconnect. Like it felt like I was, there was something out of alignment with my values. But then when I dug into it, and with what you're saying right now is so helpful, because it's exactly it, right? Like when you're sourcing ingredients at a bigger scale, it helps, it reduces the price. You have more of an audience now, your message is out, and you can still be sharing so much like free things that are actually an embodiment of the brand to build that. It's important to have that balance. And so thank you for sharing that, because I feel
another part of this is usually because I've had people come to me being like, oh, but I just really want accessible prices. And the thing that I usually come back that hits some people is you realize if you show up with your free marketing and give incredible value in your free marketing, suddenly your work is extremely accessible for free.
Absolutely. Because it's not always about the product or the service. Like, of course, that is something that people ultimately are going to end up. And either way, you're still going to get value from everything that surrounds that product or service, which is like the message, the vision, the free content, like all of it, because it's a shift in perspective. And actually, this even leads me into the question about marketing, because I've started viewing marketing now as not like a tool to extract or sell, but a tool to unlearn and relearn, to educate, to like spread a message. So like shifting that mindset of as marketing as sort of like this toxic, I feel like there's a bit of like a toxic energy around it. And again, it's like that thing where it's like when the veil is lifted in certain ways, you have a bit of resistance to it. And it's like, well, how can I now make that work for me in a way that's in alignment with my values versus just reject it completely?
Yeah. I think the biggest misperception that comes with traditional marketing is you can just choose that your marketing is as valuable as the products that you sell. And you can show up with the same level of value and the same level of transformation to your free stuff as you do the paid stuff. And this is whenever I see businesses with really high profit margins and are set for the long haul and they're building cult followings that want to buy everything that they put out, they do this. They put out marketing that's so amazing and transformative. I'm not saying expensive. It's not like high quality video productions. It's like, no, they're showing up. They're being intimate with themselves. They're sharing who they are. They're telling stories, but they're coming forward in their marketing. What is marketing other than allowing people to have a transformation before they ever buy from you? If they ever buy from you, and there's nothing more regenerative than that. Yeah. If we're thinking about the ripple effect of a regenerative business, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who never buy from you who are impacted by your work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point and such a different perspective when you think about the big Fortune 100, the L'Oreals or big companies. I don't think of those companies and think, oh, I'm getting so much value from them from a messaging standpoint or just being in proximity to them. Like it's literally just you see an ad and it's either trying to sell me something and I either have the discernment to be like, nope, don't need that, or you get stuck on this sort of like rabbit hole of buying versus what you're saying from a regenerative business perspective's role in society is to be constantly adding, giving value and having that ripple effect. What would you, okay, this is maybe a big question, but based on everything that we're saying and like a regenerative business's role in the world, what is your vision for the world? Like when you think about everything you do and what keeps you going, I think it's like Simon Sinek who has that question, what world are you working towards creating, even if you don't live to see it actually come to fruition?
Okay. I feel like my answer might be not what people want to hear. So when I got into environmentalism,
that's always the best answer.
Yeah. When I was like awakened to environmental fervor in college, and I ended up in a environmental sustainability fellowship program. And one of the required classes had us learning about the carbon bathtub and how we're 10 years, this was over 10 years ago, how we were now past the point of return. And it made me incredibly worried and have a dark night of the soul. And like, what are we going to do? And Then I found regenerative agriculture. There are absolutely solutions that exist, but there's still a seed within me of like, there is some worry that, because especially again, over 10 years later, there hasn't been global change to try to mitigate the problem. If anything, they're like doubling down on making the problem worse. And I do fear for the future. There's a lot of legitimacy in Gen Z filing lawsuits against the government for the future that they're inheriting. So a part of the change that we're trying to make, I mean, we're reforesting 15 acres right now on Maui because that's where we live and where we own land. And so really looking locally, but also we're working on getting more people into homesteading and actually being sovereign. Because let's say there is some sort of societal collapse, we need as many people as possible with the wealth and being separate enough from society that if shit hits the fan, they can be the pillars of their community. Like we had such a good example of this last year because we just had the Lahaina fires last year and we live in Lahaina. My husband lost one of his farms and I mean, but we were so lucky, like no death, no other than like big business destruction. But we were the only people within the military blockades that were up for weeks after the fires that had communication because all the cell towers burned.
Wow.
And there was no power and people were literally walking out in a desert environment and without any cell service, without any power. And so people didn't know if people were living. Like we had many people calling in being like, do you know what's happening on the inside? And because we were off grid, we have off grid solar, we could be a pillar of communication during a natural disaster. Like, I know this is like, there's people listening that are in a corporate environment that like don't feel this at all, but it's something that's so, I started getting into this stuff when I was 19. And so it's always been on an undercurrent of why I want to build wealth and why I want to build resources and why I want to build community around me. I remember listening to an interview years ago of this big financial analyst who's also in the worried about the future sort of realm. And she talked about it doesn't matter what investments you make if you don't have a safe local community. And there's this concept called I'm not going to get the name right, but it's like the ice cream truck factor or something. And it's if you, in the neighborhood you live in, how safe do you feel sending your kids out with cash to walk down the street and buy ice cream from the ice cream truck? And that as an actual like legitimate societal factor in if you are living in a safe community. And if you don't feel safe in your local community, if you don't know your neighbors, then I mean, there's so many reasons, like in terms of happiness, in terms of like fulfillment in life, but also in terms of stability and security in uncertain times.
Yeah, no, I love it because like, okay, A, it's so important, and B, like so much conflict in the world is over not feeling safe or like fighting to feel safe or to feel secure. And it's like that, like you said, it's such a big marker that some people might not even realize, and ignorance is bliss. There is that, but then I feel like there's also parts of this that are a result of the Industrial Revolution, like you brought up. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Carol Sanford's work, but I've really like loved like when it comes to like self-determination or even as a human being ever evolving and discerning and creating environments that allow that and being more resourceful, which is super important, but it's not necessarily what we're taught or how we grow up. Like you grow up, become an expert in one thing, or stay in this specific way. We don't see very much carry over of lineage in a lot of ways. Like I was talking to somebody about this on a podcast recently where it was like, you know, we're this culture of convenience. And so you think of something that you need and it's easier to go on Amazon and buy a solution than it is to be like, how can I solve that problem? Like, you know, I feel like my grandparents or even parents like have they're so much more resourceful in like how they solve problems, like getting a stain out or like whatever, things that are so simple. And what are we going to do when like hard stuff actually happens? Like we're so reliant on a system that is not even serving us or supporting us.
Yeah. So when I'm like looking in the future, the thing that I'm most excited about right now is like, how do we make the people who care more wealthy? Like, honestly, I'm like in my one track where I talk with a lot of small business owners who care so much. but they're struggling on just covering costs, that they can't think of the next step, when really activism and thinking about how your money will impact the world is usually the bridge to making more money.
That's a beautiful paradigm shift as well. Looking at activism as a pathway to actually growing your business.
Yeah.
And how can people, 2 questions to bring this to a close. What can a business do to bring more activism or bring the things that they care about into their business? But also, how can individuals ground some of this stuff that we're talking about too? So even if they're not like a business owner, like how do you just sort of become more intentional and discerning around some of the like unconscious habits or like ways of operating that we just do day to day unconsciously? Like how do you become even a more conscious consumer?
Yeah. Those feel like different questions.
Yeah,
Sure, I'll start with one and then remind me of the other one, because I'm not going to remember.
Yeah.
For businesses, there's 2 routes that you can do both of them, but one is you have profits and commit a portion of those to a cause that matters to you. And the other one is, how do you incorporate the things that you care deeply about into your business? Both of them are fine. And this applies to the individual question too. I think a lot of people know what they care about, but some people haven't gone the next step of like going deep into finding the cause or the values, the way that they want to change the world that actually lights a fire in their vein. And so much good. If you can find the thing that you actually care about and find ways to support it, even if it's like recurring donation of $5 a month, amazing. Because all of us have different values. And there can be this righteousness in the activism space that I don't think is useful. Like, of course, I want to feed homeless kids, but like, I actually don't care that much about that. That's not the fire in my vein. Of course, we should help with HIV and AIDS in Africa, but that's not the fire that lights my veins. Mine is reforesting land back to Indigenous peoples and climate change. That's not everyone's, but that is mine. That is the one that I'm like, I want to like die. I want to bleed for. And so if you can actually identify the thing and go on this journey of finding out what it was, your life will become so much more meaningful. We're living in a time where there's not enough meaning. And that's why there's all of this junk food connection with people and not being conscious in our day-to-day life, because there isn't this higher meaning. And it can just be like whatever small thing that's happening in your local community. But that's the thing you really care about. You're going to like 10x your enjoyment of life. So
yeah,
let's start with that.
Well, and what a beautiful way to build more sort of trust and safety within your immediate community. And then also to sort of cut through the overwhelm of like, there's so many things to care about, or there's so much going on in the world. And I think I hear a lot of times like people are almost overwhelmed with feeling like whatever they do is not really going to make a difference. And so they don't pick anything. And so I feel like when you can pick something that you truly care about, like you're saying, and really lights you up, if everyone did that, like the world would be so different. Like if everyone actually did choose something versus just allowing the overwhelm to consume them.
And one little practical thing with this is when people start feeling these feelings, they're like, I'm going to start a nonprofit. Please don't do that. There are so many nonprofits that exist that are doing amazing work and have the structures and organization in place. And there's often like, I feel like in California, there's literally hundreds of getting plastic out of the ocean nonprofits. And if all of them came together, how much more change they'd be able to make, because they wouldn't be like wasting time organizationally and administratively. So like, resist the urge is actually not going to have the impact you want to make, other than finding the nonprofit. Or if you want to go that route, I mean, we're just literally planting trees. We're like just doing the work because my husband's a regenerative farmer. So like, great, partner with him. But find one. And if you are donating money to a nonprofit, you get to specify how the money is spent. They are legally obligated to spend the money how you want it to be spent. So you can be like, I want to do a campaign for this one nonprofit, and I'm going to talk with them. They probably have a fundraising person. I'm going to talk with them on how to be an effective thing. And we're going to talk about exactly what each dollar is going to go towards.
which I just want to plug into, like coming back to even regenerative business, that's such a practical, real example of like how traditional, more extractive business models versus regenerative, because like the old sort of way is like colonize the space, or like I have an idea, I'm just gonna like power through and like create this solution and like not really collaborate or co-create with people, but just like come in with this solution that I think is beneficial, versus asking the people in the community, collaborating with the nonprofits that are already existing, that are working on that, coming together to have such a bigger impact, a real thing that's happening. And again, like an example of regenerative versus traditional or extractive.
Can I circle back to a point we were talking about earlier?
Please go for it.
So I have so much to say about marketing, and like I feel like there was one little point that I wanted
podcast on marketing.
Yeah, I know. So we were talking about how do we make marketing not be this extractive thing, because there's this common thing of how do we make people feel scarcity and how do we make them feel ashamed so that they feel motivated to make the change. And people will immediately pendulum swing and revolt into, I can never talk about problems. I can only talk about desires and like results. So first point is there's actually a lot of value in meeting people and identifying and having people feel seen in their problems. Because if you're just talking about like the positive side of change, it can actually be shaming and people don't actually feel an intimate connection with you and acknowledgement of where they are. We don't want to just swing over to like, oh, we can't talk about pain points at all. There's actually beauty in the connection that can be found of like, I actually totally understand where you are. I've been there, or my client's been there, and there is a way through. So that's point number one. And the other thing with marketing and communication is I like to think of it almost like a frequency stream, where like almost like a song. When you hear a really good song that like gets you in the mood to exercise, or like totally like you play it in the morning just to like have an amazing day and get excited for life, it changes your frequency state. That's what actual words can be, what marketing words can be. So if you start to tune in to the paradigm that you want to create in the world of like possible, and the vision you see that's possible through your business, through the work you're doing in the world, and inviting people into it, that is how you can actually make marketing this transformative act that makes the world a better place. Okay.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I love that. And I think like it is so interesting how the human desire is sort of like revolt against something and then you sort of avoid it, but it's like not actually the problem. And I think the intentionality, like you're saying, like where it's coming from and what world are you actually working towards, and what is the intention of you bringing this person that you're speaking to on this journey. Is it just to, going back to your earlier comment, I want to have $1 million business and so I'm going to do XYZ? Or is it, I want to create this massive change and transformation in the world and so I'm going to meet people where they're at and bring them on a journey? And two very different places. So I hope that people are inspired. I mean, I'm so inspired just hearing you speak about some of the ways that you can actually implement this in a business, and also in really practical ways that are not necessarily moving or working against things, working with things. That's such a refreshing perspective. So thank you. I'm so happy that we got to record this episode. And I know we're like right at time, but is there anything that you wanted to share that you didn't get to share, or anything that you wanted to leave the audience with?
The through line really that we've been talking about today, that it's almost human nature to, when something bad happens, to throw it into a category of everything associated with that is bad. But as conscious creators on this earth, we have this beautiful capacity to transmute very low energy things into the highest energy. We can transmute money into the highest frequency. We can transform business into the highest frequency. And it gets to be this really joyful work. So I'm so excited for people who feel the call, hear the call to do this work, and know that it gets to be a part of their own spiritual journey. Like business gets to be a spiritual soul evolution process. Making money gets to be this soul evolution process. Being visible on the internet. So just acknowledging that if you are on this path, You are so brave. You are so courageous. And I have so much respect for you.
Oh, so beautiful. What a good way to end. I'm really feeling that. And I feel like my soul is nurtured, and the soul of my business feels more nurtured too.
Oh,
so
good.
Thank you.
And then in terms of where to find me on the internet, I'm the most active on Instagram. Like, I'm the one in the DMs. So it's at the Dirty Alchemy. Feel free to DM me and say hello. And if you screenshot this episode and tag me in it, I'll definitely share it. And then website is thedirtyalchemy.com. If you want free chapters of my book, it is thedirtyalchemy.com/free-chapters. Usually the best way to know like what's happening in my world is on Instagram. So you can see on Instagram stories, if you do my link in bio, you can see all of the current courses and trainings and mastermind programs that are happening. We have loads of resources that are like $25. So there's a really easy way of entering into our ecosystem. And my book is Regenerative Business. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on my online shop. You can find it wherever books are sold.
Amazing. And highly recommend, as I know I brought in a few of the resources that you have throughout the episode, but yeah, highly recommend to anyone, whether starting a business or just like needing a little bit of a soul refresh. There's so many valuable things.
Thank you.
And thank you, Sam.
Oh, this is a blessing. Amazing to talk with you, Katrina.
So happy you made it to the end with me of this amazing and powerful episode. Just wanted to drop a few reminders in here. I take on 2 new coaching clients a month where we go through a 2-month coaching container, the 7 chakras of business and leadership. We start with the foundation, developing more self-awareness and grounding yourself in purpose, living and leading in alignment with your values, your why, your imagined future, and really designing the life that you want to be living. We then go on working on your mindset, creativity, growth, and shaping your reality through your thoughts. Authenticity, building courage and accountability to yourself. Relationships, nurturing trust, safety, connection with others and yourself and community. Communication, which is all about listening effectively, empathically, and having really powerful, deep, vulnerable, and sometimes difficult conversations. And finally, we wrap it up with conscious leadership and business, which is all about integral thinking, seeing, knowing, and intuiting how the whole is really working in collaboration with itself, tying everything together so that you can fully step forward into your most aligned, authentic, and joyful self. I'm so excited to chat more about this program with you. It has been my life's work and I've poured my heart and soul into it. So I'm really excited to offer you an initial coaching conversation for free to see if it's the right program for you and go from there. And please be sure to check out the free resources as well in the show notes. Like what you heard and want more? Stay connected with our community on social media using the links below. Like us on your favorite podcast provider and sign up for the Conscious Loop newsletter, where we only send you goodies with one intent: to break your unconscious loops. If you have an unconscious loop you want to break free from, let us know so we can feature that loop on the show. Info and show notes, and we'll see you next time in the Conscious Loop.